Gaza War Day 273. No end in sight. In theory, there are ceasefire talks going on, but Israel continues to treat the ceasefire talks as basically surrender terms, hand the hostages back so we can resume bombing, murder, and starvation without the internal political turmoil. And if you follow New York Times, Washington Post, or whatever it is, those media cannot grasp. You can read the way they write about Gaza, Lebanon, Hamas, Hezbollah. They can't grasp that from the perspective of the axis of resistance, which includes Hamas and Hezbollah and Ansar Allah in Yemen and the Iraqi resistance and the state of Iran, that axis, all of those units, whether they're a state or a non-state actor or a militia or an army, all of them understand that this war is about the genocide in Gaza, and they will all stand down when the genocide in Gaza stops. But the Western media won't, they either don't know that or they don't want you to know that. So they talk about how Israel wants to get a deal with Hamas so they can go and fight Hezbollah. If they get a deal with Hamas, they won't need to fight Hezbollah because Hezbollah will stand down with no discussion. That's a direct quote from Hezbollah that I quoted 3 days ago in my previous sit rep. So I don't know why they talk about it in these terms, but um, they want to cut separate deals with everyone. And I don't even know whether they believe otherwise. I mean, I think they do want to cut a separate deal with Lebanon, with Hezbollah, and with Ansar Allah, try to bribe them. I think they don't understand. They couldn't understand within their worldview that the Axis actors are acting out of principle. I mean, Israel's acting out of principle too. It's just the principle of racial superiority and genocidal violence. I guess that's also a principle of a kind, isn't it? The thing that the thing that I notice about Israel's stance in these negotiations, all for this 9 months, better part of a year, or whatever, is that the loggerheads that they're at is that they are unable to contemplate a loss of freedom of action in Gaza. They want to be able to turn on and off genocide in Gaza at will. They want to be able to capture any infinite number of Palestinians and hold them as prisoners, hostages, torture victims at will. And those two freedoms that Israel enjoys, those are the freedoms that Israel is unable to contemplate losing. They're not able to curtail those, and those are what the resistance is also insisting on. They don't want Israel to be able to fire up this genocide machine again. So when the ceasefire happens, they want it to be permanent, and they're going to want their prisoners back for the Israeli prisoners, and they're going to want they're going to want guarantees that Israel can't take these prisoners again. So when you look on the Western media, TikTok showed me Cornell West being interviewed by I don't know, CNN maybe. It's an African American reporter too. So she was trying to be like a American version of Piers Morgan. So she just kept asking Cornell West and Cornell West's running mate, who I should look up, who's also pretty good in this debate, Melina Abdullah, and she was basically trying to get them to condemn Hamas. They wouldn't. She's not as good at it as Piers Morgan. She kept letting them finish, doing all kinds of terrible rhetorical things like letting them finish their sentences, unlike Piers Morgan. So, but the whole idea was, can you condemn the October 7th attacks as abhorrent? And I was missing Chomsky, in that moment. Because Cornell and West and Abdullah, they both did a good job, I thought, in rebutting. But I was thinking, Chomsky's whole thing of like, what's the point of me condemning um, Hamas? Like, I don't have moral responsibility for Hamas. The only thing I have to condemn is the US. That would always be where he would steer the debate. And he also did this thing where he would talk about the US as we. I mean, I know Scott Ritter does that, John Mearsheimer does that. I think a lot of American commentators do that. So they'll say, we Americans do this or that. And so you could imagine somebody like Morgan saying, how, and Chomsky's other truism about how you have to judge yourself by the standards or judge others by the standards that you judge yourself. So, you could imagine Chomsky saying something like, well, how could I condemn Hamas for doing what we do much more of? I can't condemn Hamas. I don't have the moral standing to condemn Hamas because we do far worse than that. And anyway, the condemning Hamas thing made me think of Noam's truisms and his debating style. Anyway, back to the Israelis. It's interesting because the Israelis, it seems like the fundamentals of Zionism are that. The fundamentals of Zionism are the ability to kidnap and torture Palestinians at will and the ability to commit genocide on Palestinians at will. And that's like, without that freedom, I don't think they want to live there. I don't think they want to be, I don't think they see themselves as having a project. And that means that if that's true, if they're not willing to curtail those freedoms for the sake of stopping the war, then they're going to be at war for the rest of Israel's existence. And there's another thing that Scott Ritter says. I've been listening to Scott Ritter's interviews about Gaza over the past few days, and he keeps bringing it back to Netanyahu. A lot of commentators do. I don't follow everybody, but I do follow Ritter, and he keeps bringing it back to Netanyahu's political survival, Netanyahu's personal guarantees. I think this is a mistake. I think Netanyahu could go, and behind Netanyahu is the Ben Gvir, and behind the Ben Gvir, there's probably someone even worse than Ben Gvir, and there's the Smotrich, and there's the guy who says we should nuke Gaza. There's the on and on and on and on. And like Abby Martin has said on YouTube, on some different channels, she said, if she's done it, if you stop an Israeli on the street and ask them their views on Palestinians or Arabs or people other than them, they'll tell you things that will be appalling and horrific. And that's why you don't see men on the street interviews in the mainstream media in the US, because the average Israeli has horrible racist views. And this is the whole of Israeli society, apart from a statistically insignificant minority. And that's true of the whole Western elite too. The whole Western elite, they know better than to say it on camera, most of them. But apart from a statistically insignificant minority, the Western elite is also utterly genocidal. So that's why, in spite of all of the ceasefire talks going on, I'm going to continue to say we have no end in sight at this point. I also continue to think that sometime in the coming weeks, Israel's going to dust off some of its divisions, do a rest and refit, and go into Lebanon as far as they can. and until they reach some opposition, which they certainly will. So we'll see. But I'm not optimistic about the ceasefire, the supposed breakthrough, the supposed imminent breakthrough, because structurally, Israel is not able to help itself from taking more prisoners, from torturing prisoners. Israel is not able to help itself in terms of closing these concentration camps down, in terms of stopping the aerial bombardment, in terms of allowing aid trucks in to stop the starvation campaign. So these are all things that require a depth of military defeat that Israel is not close to yet, I don't think. So that's where we're at as far as how close we are to the ending of this war, in my opinion. So Abu Hamza, spokesman for Saraya al-Quds, apparently told Al Mayadeen media some interesting quotes. He said, the enemy knows that fighting in Gaza for years will not achieve its objectives, as the ammunition we possess is hard to count in terms of equipment and types, and the creative ability to manufacture in the harshest conditions still exists. John probably showed you guys that video on Wednesday. You probably saw the video that they released, that Qassam, I believe, released of them in a manufacturing facility under ground somewhere, and those munitions were used immediately in the attack on a tank. They used two of them to blow up a tank. So in the past couple days, yesterday and today, there have been meetings. It's been a lot of organizational meetings by the resistance. Hamas has met with delegations from the People's Front, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the PFLP, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the DFLP, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Hamas leaders met with Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon, with Ansar Allah delegates, with the Iraqi resistance delegates. So there have been meetings here and there. Between all the factions, they talked about unity. They made plans. They talked about their political stance. So there was lots of organization going on in front of the cameras too, in front of the public. Elections in Iran, you know probably by now that the moderate candidate Pezeshkian, and not the hardliner Jalili, who was favored by the resistance account. A lot of the resistance accounts that I follow favored Jalili, but Pezeshkian won. Close. It was close. I think he won by a few tens of thousands of votes in an election with millions and millions of voters. I don't think this is going to affect foreign policy, but it's probably what I read, you know, in terms of economic doctrines and sanctions, you know, planning and trying to beat the sanctions and various things like that. Jalili had a smarter policy, more continuity with Raisi, the late President Raisi. So the people that I saw that I've been following on this are disappointed. I don't know enough. I've never done a careful study of Iran politics in that way, so I can't tell you more than those people are that I'm reading from those people. It's secondhand, but that's what I've been seeing. Yemen. Okay, so 3 days ago I told you that the spokesman for Ansar Allah in Yemen, the so-called Houthis, Yahya Sari, he tweeted 3 days. So everybody expected something, phase 5, something to do with that. But it was a warning, actually. It was a warning. It turns out whatever they were planning to do in 3 days, they didn't have to do. It wasn't an announcement. It was more of an ultimatum. Yahya Sari was warning the Saudi, and the Saudi kingdom knew exactly what he was talking about, even if we didn't. So apparently, for many years, 9 years or so, the main airport in Yemen, in Sana'a, has been under the control of the Saudis as part of the war. The Saudis had control of the airport, control of the airspace, the ability to bomb, and they had closed. Eventually, they closed the airport, and Yemen basically told them, Ansarallah gave them an ultimatum of 3 days to open the airport, and if they didn't open the airport, then something was going to happen. It was a open the airport or else, and Saudi didn't wait to find out or else, so Saudi gave them back their control of their airport. So now people in Yemen can use an airport like other people can. And I look forward to the day when people in Gaza and in the West Bank and in 1948 Palestine, when Palestinians can just get on a plane and fly to wherever they want and fly back. That's going to be a good day, and I'm very much looking forward to that day. And the airport in Gaza, the Yasser Arafat airport in Gaza, will be a high traffic airport, I guess, at that stage. So now let's talk about the fronts, the war. The In Lebanon, an important commander you probably know was killed by the Israelis. So his code name was not his code name, but his nickname, I guess, was Abu Nima. Let me look him up. He's 59 years old. He was, yeah, his name was Muhammad Name Nasser Nom de Guerre Abu Naame. Sorry, not Abu Naima, Abu Naame, it says. So he was killed, and in revenge, Hezbollah did a wide range of attacks of lots of different kinds, lots of different rockets and missiles and drones all across uh, northern Israel. And there was actually some technical discussion of it that was interesting from Haj Muhammad Ali, one of the commanders from Hezbollah's artillery unit. So he was describing the Katyusha, the Burkhan missile, which has a 500-kilogram payload, the wider range of targets, the Iron Dome batteries. There's fires in Golan, and the Syrian Golan, and other areas of northern Israel are on fire still. There's more complaints from the Israeli side about how the Israeli government has supposedly abandoned northern Israel. They haven't abandoned northern Israel. They just are not sure how to go about this war that they're going to have to fight if they want to maintain that freedom to imprison and genocide people in Gaza and the West Bank at will. If they're willing to forego that freedom, they don't have to go to war with Hezbollah. But if they're not willing to forego that freedom, then they won't get a ceasefire in Gaza, and they won't therefore be able to avoid a war with Hezbollah either. Haj Muhammad Ali from the Hezbollah artillery unit said this. He said, "No matter how long the battle in Gaza lasts, we will maintain the same performance and readiness." There was another technical discussion of what they do in the artillery unit with the Katyusha rockets. The Katyusha rockets are like unguided rockets, artillery. The somewhat simplest rocket, you could say. They're like World War II era, little Katya. Katyusha is like a Russian, it's like a girl's name. That's what they named the, the rockets that they fired. And apparently the Nazis hated them because they made this howling, screaming sound that the Nazis were scared of. And so the Russians had lots of them because that was the nature of that war, firing tons and tons and tons and tons of these rockets. So the Katyusha rockets in Lebanon also fired in bulk, and the artillery unit commander told the media that they're used not just to deplete the Iron Dome, but also to do something they called fire luring. So they watch the trajectories of the Iron Dome missiles that are shooting these rockets down, and that's how they can locate the battery, and then they can take out the battery with a drone strike or a missile strike. So that's Lebanon. I mean, it's been a very, very active front for the past few days, especially since the death of that Hezbollah commander. the West Bank, last sit rep, I told you about the drone assassination of 4 resistance fighters in Tulkarm. There's another raid of Tulkarm underway. There's another raid near Nablus underway. There's another raid near Ramallah and Bethlehem. So the Israelis are raiding all over the West Bank again. It's almost continuous. They do it often. The raids are short. They're not too long. There was one in Jenin, and this one in Jenin had a major drone attack as well. They killed 7 fighters from Qassam and Saraya al-Quds. There were notes commemorating these martyrs from Jenin, from Saraya al-Quds and the Qassam brigades. The Qassam commander was named Yassin Ahmed al-Aridi. The al-Quds commander was named Fawad Ayad Aziz Ashkar. So these 2 commanders were killed in Jenin, as well as 5 other men under their command. And this is becoming a standard, I guess, between Tulkarm and Jenin. This is becoming a standard tactical method the Israelis are using. They'll go in, they'll try to infiltrate with some special force if they're discovered, which they were in this case. There's a gun battle with resistance. The resistance ends up taking up a position inside of a house, and the Israelis call in a drone strike or an airstrike on the house. So that's more or less the way it went down. In Jenin, the Israelis withdrew after a 5-hour siege of the house, and I guess we'll see how the West Bank resistance adapts to this new Israeli tactic or strategy, maybe. I don't know if it rises to the level of strategy. Let's call it a tactic. Another tactic the Israelis are doing is they're capturing and torturing family members to try to get their wanted men. So they want a son, they want somebody's son, they take the father. In this case, they took the father of somebody they wanted and they tortured him to death. They wanted Dia Shawahne and they tortured Jamal Shawahne, his father, to death. So that's how they do things in Israel. That's how the Israelis do things. And this is like, Human Rights Watch are not really looking at this practice of the Israelis, the capture and torture of family members. This doesn't really fit with the attempt to blame it on Hamas through human shields or whatever. It's just an absolutely depraved, evil practice, and so you're probably not going to hear about it at all. The Western elite won't, the media won't cover this at all because there's no way to spin this and blame the Palestinians for it. So in Gaza, there have been lots of aerial massacres. So that's the favorite tactic that Israel's moving towards, just aerial massacre at an UNRWA warehouse in Zaytun, a house in Nusayrat, an UNRWA facility in Maghazi. So they'll drop leaflets and tell people to leave. They'll bomb where they find people. They'll bomb places multiple times. As far as the resistance goes, in Shujaiyya, there's a video, which I'm sure John Elmer will show you. It's already on his Twitter, of Saraya al-Quds, of an ambush from downstairs attacking Israelis that have set up on the upper floor of a building. They're attacking upstairs from the lower floor. So, and they've done that before. I think we saw months ago, there was a video of a guy clutching his blanket. I think the guy ended up getting killed in that fight, but there was a firefight, and it was Saraya al-Quds again coming up from downstairs on an Israeli force that was on the top floor. And I think the body cams were captured or leaked, or the Israelis showed the video from the body cams of these soldiers. There's also a field report from Rafah that was very interesting because it looks like a big operation and a kind of a different kind of operation. So the field report goes, a large number of Al-Qassam fighters raided the fortified enemy operational headquarters southeast of Tal al-Sultan neighborhood in Rafah with anti-fortification shells, anti-personnel shells, sniping operations, and medium machine guns. The operation resulted in several enemy soldiers being killed and injured. So the Israelis are set up in this field headquarters, and Qassam is attacking with mortars, shells, getting close enough to use machine guns and snipers, and killing and injuring soldiers at their headquarters. So the message is maybe this isn't the best place for a headquarters. The Palestinians have been saying politically that they won't accept any occupation as part of any ceasefire or deal. They won't accept the occupation of any inch of Gaza. The Israelis are going to have to leave the Philadelphia corridor, the Netzarim corridor, and everything else if they want a ceasefire. And if they don't, if they want to stay, they're going to come under fire of this type and every other type that we've been seeing in terms of destruction of armored vehicles, destruction of infantry forces in occupied houses, and also the resistance has the ability to attack them in their field headquarters even after they've set up camp in whatever fortifications they've set up. The other note that I wanted to make in terms of military observations is we're seeing Israelis reporting on casualties from mortar and rocket attacks. It's not just ambushes, but these mortar attacks, these Rajum attacks, these rocket attacks of various kinds from close and far. We're seeing more Israeli soldiers, at least they're reporting more Israeli soldiers falling in battle from these type of attacks. And it subjectively feels like there's more of this going on. And this is the kind of thing that the resistance does in quantity. Ambushes and attacks on armored vehicles with the Yasin 105 or the other anti-tank weapons. Those are pretty big deals when we see them, compared to the more or less constant barrages of rockets and mortars that we see, and they show those videos all the time. And those videos of those rocket launches, what's happening on the other side is now in recent days and maybe weeks, certainly in recent days, we're seeing Israeli casualties coming out of those attacks. So it goes on, and so it goes on, with more resistance and more fighting, and and uh, and no deal in sight and no end in sight. The the but yeah, I guess we'll see how the weekend shapes up, what new horrors are in store in terms of what the Israelis are planning to do. I am not expecting a breakthrough in the ceasefire talks. If I would be very happy. I will return here with my, what do you call it? With a big slice of humble pie if I'm wrong. And I will happily eat it if that's the case. If it's not the case, as I suspect, then I will entreat you to hold on. And I'll see you in the next one. Like and subscribe and do all the things, please. And we'll see you guys in the next one.